Hi, I'm David Seymour, the ACT candidate for Whangarei. So this video is in relation to the Whangarei Girls High School's questions that they were going to ask at Meet the Candidates meeting, which unfortunately had to be cancelled due to the COVID lockdowns, etc. So firstly, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a Whangarei lad, born and raised and lived and worked in Whangarei all my life. And I've decided to stand for the ACT candidate position in Whangarei because we're campaigning for the ACT party vote, because ACT is a party based more on common sense and rational thinking and asking for accountability from our government than probably any other party. And so, because I'm campaigning for the party vote more than the electoral seat, I don't believe I'll actually get the Whangarei electoral seat. But ACT are asking for the party vote so we can get in a number of list MPs into Parliament. And so, as you probably understand, is that there is two votes when it comes to that. There's one for your favourite candidate in Whangarei, and there's one for your favourite party, because the two may be quite different. And I believe that given the opportunity for ACT to be represented in Parliament by a number of candidates, our priorities are, first and foremost, is to make sure that we can get more choices and more freedom for New Zealanders, within the laws, of course, because ACT, as I said, is about common sense and accountability in government. And one of the things is when we're passing more legislation, ACT want to try and encourage legislation that is actually of benefit to New Zealanders in the respect of economy and growth, rather than more regulation. Instead of more taxes and more regulations and more of the same old, ACT are looking to try and get legislation through that actually makes living in New Zealand better and more enjoyable and easier, rather than lumping on more taxes and regulations which make it firstly harder for the individual, because you all of a sudden got more taxes going out of your pocket, and then for businesses because there's more regulations which make it harder and harder to do business and to stay in business. So the priority is, because the question being what are our main priorities if we win the election? Well, as I say, ACT won't win the election, but we hope to get that number of percentage of party votes. So what I've just said can be our priorities. And there are a number of policies there, but I haven't got time to tell you all about them. But what I do encourage you to do, to go through, is actually have a look at act.org.nz and see all our policies in detail. So the next question is how will you support young Māori in our community? Well, again, ACT are keen to see all young New Zealanders succeed, and when it comes to education and so forth, we need to ensure that our education is actually up to standard. It is one of the better education systems in the world, but what we have is a whole lot of bureaucracy, and we've got a whole lot of what we call middle management in the education department in the Ministry of Education, and a lot of that needs to be slashed out, and we could put up to maybe something like $200 million into the front line, so there are more educational programs, and of course then hopefully that will actually expand out to Pacific areas like Māori and that sort of thing. So what we want to do is make sure that there is actually adequate support in the education system, and then adequate support in our communities in a range of different ways, whether it's mental health, whether it's just physical health, whether it's getting through business applications so you can actually start businesses and so forth. And as I said, regardless of whether you're Māori or whether you're a New Zealander or any other ethnic group, it's important that we actually just support all New Zealanders moving forward. Question number 3, which is an interesting question, is what are we going to do in regards to climate crisis? Well, in the past, we've prided ourselves as a country of being clean and green, but in reality, we lag behind in a lot of ways of what other countries are doing, and not just in in climate change itself, but also environment. You know, we talk about banning plastic bags, but there's thousands and thousands of tons of plastic floating around our oceans which need to be addressed. We talk about recycling, but we actually still have a lot of waste going into landfill which needs to be addressed. We ban oil and gas exploration, but then we import Indonesian coal. Our environmental monitoring systems are giving us a picture of what the state of our environment really is, and it's not as good as we'd like to think it is. And the government's response up until now has all too often been, if in doubt, let's just regulate. So changing regulations doesn't actually fix the problem. But when it comes to climate crisis, just to start off with, what ACT want to do is actually cut the amount of flights by politicians just on that basis alone by 25%, which will make a huge difference because there's too many politicians flying in and out of Wellington. So that's the first little thing that we can do to actually lead by example. But when it comes to climate change, we want to introduce a no-nonsense climate change plan which ties our carbon price to that of our trading partners. So also ACT proposes to change our climate change regulations to provide carbon credits for New Zealand wood products that store carbon for at least 50 years. The current climate rules that carbon from every tree felled process is released as soon as it leaves the forest. These and other environmental planning rules mean that a sustainable resilient wood products get no recognition from the actual climate benefit. The government has signalled in the past that it will increase the price of carbon to reduce emissions by 30%, but actually doing that doesn't actually make it work. It's another regulation. What we have to be is having open and honest conversations with our industries about how can we do things better. And just putting a regulation in place doesn't necessarily fix the problem. We have to actually look at the physical problem itself and how can that be changed, how can it be reduced to help our climate change situation. And so what ACT will do will give carbon credits where credits are due. Question number 4. What are your views on the Cannabis Referendum? Well, first of all, I just want you to understand that the Cannabis Referendum is what they call a non-binding referendum. So it doesn't matter even if it gets over the 50% yes vote, it is not actually going to change the law about cannabis straight away. Basically what it is doing is gaining public opinion as to the views of cannabis in New Zealand. And where it's all fun and games to have a bit of a smoke up now and again, is cannabis something that we want readily available in our community? How does it actually affect younger people like yourselves in the long term? You know, as they say, there's no harm in the respect of having a smoke now and again, but what we don't want is actually having our society becoming dependent on cannabis and all being half zonked out because of it. The dangers, the physical dangers of that, people working on building sites or working in other workplaces, for example, that aren't totally coherent because they're a little bit stoned, actually will create more issues. So it sounds like fun and games to be able to grow a bit of weed and be able to smoke a bit of dope without getting prosecuted for it or hassled by the police for it. But at the other end of the scale, what are the real ongoing issues? Is having cannabis available, that readily available and free to smoke, so to speak, a positive thing for our country? And I don't think it is. It's not that I'm against cannabis, I just don't think it should be encouraged. Because here's the other thing, New Zealand is trying to become what they call a smoke-free country by 2025, which means that we will have only a population reduced from around about 18% of current smokers down to hopefully less than 5% in another 5 years. And so if we achieve that, but then we're encouraging people to smoke cannabis, one counteracts the other. So my honest opinion is I don't think we need cannabis that readily available in New Zealand. If you're going to have a smoke now and again, you're going to smoke now and again anyway. So I'm not encouraging you to do that. I think there's better things in the world than getting stoned. But my vote would be no. Question number 5. What are your views on euthanasia referendum? Well, in case you did not, you probably don't realise it, but I'm actually terminally ill. I have a disease called motor neuron disease, which is actually taking away my ability to move, and in due course it'll actually reduce my ability to speak and breathe freely. I'll be fed by somebody else. I'll be by what they call a peg, and literally will not be able to do very much at all. So in short, I believe it should be a yes vote. Now I say that because I believe New Zealanders should have the choice at the end of their lives, when they're terminally ill with only a few months to live, on how they slide on out of here. Why should they have to lie there suffering if that's not what they want? And I ask you to just consider this. There's 3 things that currently in place that are totally legal. One is you can have a do not resuscitate order in place. So if in the event of, regardless of whether you're terminally ill or not, and regardless of you having an event and you've got a do not resuscitate order in place, the doctors cannot do anything to help you, so you're likely to die. Second one is, if you are ill and you're taking medication or having medical treatment of some description and it doesn't agree with you, you're sick of it, you're over it, you don't want to do it anymore, well, the doctors can't force you to take that medicine or have those treatments. And if you don't have those treatments, maybe you will die as a result of it. And that's just the way it is. And the third one is, if you have any medical equipment keeping you alive, for example, a respiration type machine, a ventilating machine, a heart type machine, and you go, listen, I don't want this anymore, you can actually say to the doctor, turn it off, and you might die from it. So why shouldn't you be allowed the choice of asking for assistance to slide on out of here when you know you're going to die, you're totally with it as far as making that decision, you're not coerced by family, you just want to slide out of here in a peaceful way on your terms when you're ready. So for me, the vote is yes, but I'm not saying that I'll actually use that choice, but I think we should have the ability to have that choice. So for the euthanasia, the end of life choice referendum, it's a yes vote from me, and I encourage you to do the same. So, question number 6 is, how do you plan to develop more housing? Well, there's a number of ways that we can do it, and the governments over the past years have not done a great job at creating more housing. But here's the thing, is it actually comes down to people owning their own homes. It also works around getting more people into work, so then they actually earn more money, they can actually afford to buy their own homes. But so we can get more homes in New Zealand, one of the things that needs to change is the RMA, or better known as the Resource Management Act. That needs to change so it makes it easier to actually do planning and developments, so we can build more properties and make it easier for our building industry to actually go ahead and build. Because if you're not familiar with the Resource Management Act, it actually requires you to put in applications for special permissions to do certain things like subdivisions and so forth of land, and how many houses you can put on a section and all those sort of things. And quite often it's a long, drawn out, slow, painful and expensive process, so that needs to change. And then also the building regulation and the way that that's handled with local councils needs to change. So ACT is encouraging those changes if we get enough votes in place to be able to do that. And lastly but not least is, why should we vote for you over your opponents? Well, hopefully all the answers that I've given you in the previous few minutes will actually encourage you to give ACT your party vote, because you'll realise we're actually just talking common sense. I'm not trying to fill your heads with numbers and crazy sort of suggestions about how great we are and everything else, because you know what, so many politicians in the past have said, yes, we're going to do this, yes, we're going to do that, and yeah, we're going to chuck $1 billion here and $1 billion there, but they never do. They absolutely fail miserably in that respect, because one person, me, even if I was lucky enough to go to Parliament, I cannot change the world. But with your party vote, the ACT Party will do its best to do the things that we've talked about in the previous few minutes. So please, and more, so please give us your party vote and change your future. I'm David Seymour for ACT Party, the Whangarei candidate. All the best.